So our speaker today is Guy Verhofstadt. Now, Guy was Prime Minister of Belgium and has been head of the Liberal Alliance in the European Parliament for a long time. He is a firebrand politician. He fearlessly says exactly what he thinks. He is pro-European, and he is anti-anyone who would destroy the unity that is being created. So he's very interesting. He is the I'd have to ask him, the personal enemy of Nigel Farage. They have had so many spats in public as well, and very entertainingly, but also very, I think, very heartfelt and meant. So he's very much the representative of the positive impact that a European Union can have. As part of that, interestingly, has been appointed as the chief Brexit negotiator for EU when it comes to, obviously, the negotiations of Britain leaving the European Union. So it is fantastic to have him here. He's at the center of the stuff that is very, very important to us, and he has huge insight. Please welcome Guy Verhofstadt. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I have no slides with me, so it's an old style, I should say. So I don't know what I do with this little. I don't think that's for a bombing, because I look like a suicide bomber for the moment. No? With all these micros. So thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I think that I'm gonna ask you to do that in my next election, that you come to Belgium once, to explain all the positive things you think about me. It's always useful as a politician. And so let me start, ladies and gentlemen, with saying that it's obvious that Europe is in a bad shape for the moment. There is not only Brexit is one of the elements, but there is more than that. We are under threat from, I should say, from three sides. There is the jihadism, the political Islam, terrorist attacks is one element. I think we are under threat of the East, of Vladimir Putin, who wants openly to divide the European Union, and who is supporting, financing even, right-wing political parties inside the Union, also hacking websites and so on in a number of countries. And I think that since the election of Donald Trump, there is a third threat for the European Union, and that is Trump itself, who has openly said, well, I hope for a further disintegration of the European Union. And not only him, all the people around him, Steve Bannon, for example, is openly starting with news sites, Breitbart sites in Paris, in Berlin, to undermine, in fact, the unity of the European Union. So if you look from the outside to the European Union, well, it's quite a threat, jihadism, Putin, Trump, and then inside the Brexit negotiations that we are doing. And so, the question is not only the threats that we have, but also the multiple crises that we see for the moment in the Union. Refugee crisis, migration crisis, the problems with in our neighborhood, for example, Ukraine, for example, the ongoing war in Syria, and our incapacity to intervene in all this. So that also the fallout, still the fallout of the financial crisis, and I come back to that problem. So if you look to this, you could say, yeah, Europe is facing a polycrisis, and apparently it's not capable to get its act together, to react to this. And a good example of this is, I'm always telling that story, the way the Americans have emerged from the financial crisis, and the way Europe has emerged, between brackets, of the financial crisis of 2008. So what the Americans did was immediately launching what I call a three-stage rocket in 2008. Three-stage rocket, third stage TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program, $400 billion to clean up the banks, and the last dollar have been paid back on the 1st of January 2014 of that money, so there is no $1 taxpayers' money anymore in the banks or in the insurance companies that have been helped at the moment in the aftermath of the financial crisis. So that was the first stage of the rocket. Then immediately an investment package, a huge investment package, still running, $900 billion in the period 2009-2019. And then third stage of the rocket was a quantitative easing program of more or less 1.2, 1.3 trillion. And all this three-stage rocket was launched in a period of 9 months, not more than that. In these 9 months, and with two administrations, because it started with the Republican administration and it went further, it was implemented by a Democratic administration, by the Obama administration. So that was their response to the financial crisis. In 9 months, not big discussions, not big ideological difference of view, whop, launching a three-stage rocket immediately. And then you have to look to the way the European Union, what the European Union has done in the meanwhile. We are still debating about what to do. What is the right strategy to follow? We are still in a debate between, I call it always, Ferguson at the one hand and Krugman at the other hand. Do we need austerity? Do we need growth? And half of the European leaders think that we have to follow Ferguson, and half of the European leaders think that we have to follow Krugman in its advice. And the reality is that nothing is happening. We still don't have a full-fledged banking union, for example. We have a banking union. It is the European Central Bank who is doing the job now, but we don't have a fund when tomorrow there is a big bank that collapse, go bankrupt in Europe. There is no European fund ready because we are still discussing about the contributions that the member states will do to that fund. So if you look, we have a small investment program. Finally, the so-called Juncker plan, 300 billion. So 1/3 of the American investment plan. And we did finally, at the end, quantitative easing. And we are still continuing with quantitative easing, but not to stimulate the economy, but to avoid deflation. By necessity, I should say, this QA was. So if you look from the outside world, you see an American administration who acts immediately in 9 months is capable to launch a three-stage rocket, and at the other hand, you have Europe who is still, well, who have still not cleaned up the banks, let's be honest. And everybody knows that the first thing to do if you want to emerge from a financial crisis is clean up your banks. Make that your banks have a good basis so that private investment can return, that credit can be given to the private economy. So America came out of this financial crisis maybe stronger as before, and we are what I call still in what I call a type of Japanese winter. You know, the long-standing crisis that started in Japan in 1990. And why? Because also they were not capable for more than 13 years to clean up their banks before recovering. So, and you have to ask you the question, how is it possible? How the Americans can act in 9 months decisively, and we are still discussing the banking union, still discussing, oh, do we need to clean up the banks, and so on and so on. Well, I think that the main problem is a political and institutional problem. I know that people are saying it's the economy stupid, but no, I think it's wrong. It's politics stupid. And to illustrate that, I want to refer to what I like as a book, a good book, Why Nations Fail, maybe you know it, of Akamoglu and Robinson, a book of two Americans that has been published, I think, 3-4 years ago. And in Why Nations Fail, they explain that it's about institutions and that a country, a nation, fail when they don't have the right political institutions, property rights, rule of law, system of justice, democracy, human rights, and so on. And the book starts, it's a very interesting book, starts with a story of a little town on the border between Mexico and the United States. The name is Nogales, and that little town, the north of that town is in the US, and the south of the town is in Mexico. And it's all the same people with the same DNA who are living in Nogales. They're all family for each other. They eat the same food, Mexican food, in Nogales. Well, but in the north, they are 5 times richer than in the south. Why? Because in the north, they have a rule of law, less corruption, a decent system of justice, democracy, and they don't have it in the south. Well, the same applied to the European Union. The reason that we cannot emerge as fast, for example, as the Americans from a financial crisis, and we have better results, is because we have not the right institutions. European Union, I'm always saying, doesn't exist. We are using the word the Union, the European Union, but it is still what I call a loose confederation of nation states. A loose confederation of nation states based on one element, based on the unanimity rule. And if there is one little coalition partner in one of the countries of the member states of the European Union who is against one or other measure, well, everything is blocked. And that's the reason why the European Union is always acting what we call too little, too late. That is that you need the approval of 28 member states on every substantial measure, on every substantial action that the European Union wants to take. This unanimity rule is already an old rule. It's the rule of, was the outcome, we call it the Luxembourg Compromise. And why the Luxembourg Compromise? Because in 1966, there was a huge crisis. Charles de Gaulle didn't want to continue with the European Union, or the European Community at that time. It was called like that. And then the outcome of this crisis was the Luxembourg Compromise. That means that if a country thinks that its vital interest is at stake, he can use a veto. And that is the weakness of the European Union. That is that everything, every action, for example, rolling out a border and coast guard at the moment of refugee crisis, or rolling out an investment plan in the aftermath of financial crisis. It takes years and years before it can be done, because you need this unanimity of these 28 in the future 27 member states to go forward. I compare it always to make it clear with, again, with the US. Imagine one moment that the United States of America should be governed based on the same rules as the European Union. How should it work? First of all, you should not have one president, Obama or Trump. You should have at least 3 presidents. That's the first thing. And we have a president of the Commission, a president of the Parliament, president of the Council, Mr. Tusk. And the second thing that you should see is that, well, it will be the 50 governors of the 50 states of the United States coming together 5-6 times a year to decide on all the important issues in the US. So they come together in Washington 6 times a year, all 50, and saying, okay, what do you think? What do we do with the dollar? What we do with Putin? What is our strategy towards Putin? Everybody should understand that it cannot work. One governor, Alaska, Vermont, I don't know, could say, no, stop, I don't agree. That's the way the European Union is working. And moreover, it should be a system in which a state of the US could opt in or opt out, as we know in the European Union. For example, California is saying, well, the dollar, I like it, but I don't want to participate anymore. I like more the Spanish peseta. I go back to the Spanish peseta like in the middle of the 19th century, because in the US, the Spanish peseta was a currency in competition with the dollar until the mid of the 19th century. So that should happen. California is saying, I stop with the dollar, I go back to the Spanish peseta. Or for example, a state like Florida saying, well, you know, we have a huge border and coast problem, but we don't participate in the American border and coast guard. That's not for us. We're going to opt out from these policies. We're going to do it ourselves. Or, for example, Vermont or Washington or another state saying, well, the FBI, fine, it's a fantastic organization, but we're going to not participate in the FBI. We're going to do it ourselves. Because for these 200 big crimes where the FBI is responsible for, we're going to do it ourselves. That should be the way. It should not work, naturally, that states can escape or that can opt in or can opt out. Well, that's exactly the way the European Union is working. A European Union doesn't exist today. We are using that narrative, but it doesn't exist. It is still a confederation of 28 member states, still deciding everything based on unanimity, and in fact not capable to produce, fast track, I should say, the policies we are desperately needed. And it's for that reason that I have applauded a few days ago in the European Parliament the exercise of the President of the Commission, Juncker, where he presented more or less 5 scenarios for the future. And these 5 scenarios for the future are in fact not 5 scenarios, because the first is we do nothing at all. We continue like we are, what we are doing. The second was also not a real scenario, saying, yeah, we're gonna fall back only on a single market, and on all the other policies, we forget them. The third was, okay, let's have a 2, 3, 4-speed Europe. That's also not a big alternative, because the reality is that we have today a Europe with 28 speeds in Europe. Every member state can pick and choose his policies. You are part of the euro, yes or no? You're part of the Schengen area, yes or no? You participate to the European patent, for example. This country not, and for the European arrest warrant also, got Italy an opt-out for more than 10 years. So every country, in fact, that's the reality of the union, so that's the reason why I'm saying it's not a union, can pick and choose its own policies and make a sort Europe à la carte for himself. So, like you go in a restaurant, you say, that I like, that I like, that I like, all the other policies, I continue my own sovereignty. That not only we cannot explain it, it can naturally not work. And that is the weaknesses of Europe. So if politicians today and national politicians are saying, well, we have too much Europe, I doubt about too much Europe. What does it mean? The budget of the European Union, ladies and gentlemen, is 1% of the European GDP. 1%. And of this 1%, 80% of this 1%, so 0.8%, is in fact contributions of the member states going to Europe and going immediately back to the member states for a number of projects, for a number of programs. So money going to Europe and returning in the same year to the same member states who have done these contributions. That's 80% of that 1%. And the rest, what is over of it, 0.2%. From this 0.2%, you need 0.06% to pay your civil servants, your agencies, your institutions. So the real room of maneuver in the European budget is 0.16% of the European GDP. So that is the reality of Europe. And I compare that with, for example, the budget in the US. The budget in the US is 23% of the American GDP. Or I compare it, for example, with the budget of the Swiss Confederation. Oh, that's a confederation. That's 15% of the Swiss GDP. So it's clear that Europe cannot. And a good example of this is, for example, the way we are doing the management of our outside borders in the Union. We have created now a new European Border and Coast Guard. We will take over, or should take over, a number of tasks of the Italian Coast Guard, of the Greek Coast Guard, and so on. You know what the total amount is, the budget is? of the European Border and Coast Guard, it's 250 million euro. So we're going to manage our external borders with 250 million. You know what home security has in the US Department of Home Security in the United States of America is $62 billion. And half of it, more than $32 billion, is for border management, migration, refugee policies, and so on. So we're going to do it with 250 million, but it's naturally a joke, because the reality is, if you want to do it properly, yeah, you need a serious budget. You need, for example, something of the size, of nearly the size as the Americans. And it's not only there. Look to, for example, defense. It's exactly the same. The Europeans are the second largest defense budget of the world, after the Americans, naturally. We have more or less 42% of the American budget. If you combine the 28 member states of the Union, all military expenditures are 42% of the American. That's the input. Then you look to what comes out of it. We are only capable to do 10, some are saying 15% of the operations of the American army. That's the reality. I can tell you, I'm a lawyer, so about mathematics I've done nothing at all. Nevertheless, I was Minister of Budget for a while. But yeah, you have to know, for budget minister, you don't need to know mathematics. So the only thing that you have to know is the word no. That's the only thing that you need as a Minister of Budget. So I'm a lawyer, but I understand that when you put 42% of your money in military expenditures, and you can only do 10 or 12% or 15% maximum of their operations, you're 3 to 4 times less effective. That's the reality. Why? Because we duplicate 28 times the same thing. In 28 countries, we have strategic air transport, tactical forces, medical forces, intelligence services, and we have created an inflation of cooperations between the countries. That's the new buzzword in Europe. If you say something that doesn't work, you say, yeah, we're going to better coordinate us. Problem with terrorist attacks, lack of sharing of information between between the intelligence services and the police services in Europe. We have seen it after the attack in Madrid in 2004. We have seen the same thing after the attack in 2005 in London. We have seen the same thing after the attacks in Paris and in Brussels 2015 and 2016. Every time the same problem. No sharing of information between intelligence and investigation services. Well, it's obvious what we need to do. We need to create European capacities and European capabilities. It's not enough, not sufficient to say, oh, we're going to coordinate better between 28 based on the unanimity route, so that one country or one coalition party in one country can block the whole decision process. You need to create what the Americans have done. The FBI have been created after a terrorist attack in 1901, the murder of McKinley, American president. And after that, they said impossible to do it state by state. We're going to coordinate this, and the FBI was created. In Germany, the same thing. After the Second World War, the 1972 attacks in the Olympic Games, then the Bundeskriminalamt was created, because before it were the Länder who were 100% responsible for investigation and intelligence. And the Bundeskriminalamt was a very small organization, 800 people at that time, before '72. And it became the Bundeskriminalamt of today because there was a need to do so. Because, yeah, our police services still are bound by borders, but terrorists are not bound by borders. So the lesson to take from this is that we need desperately a scenario in which we do what is necessary in the world of tomorrow. That is what I call a federal Europe. A Europe not with all the competence, all the sovereignty on the European level, but a federal system in which a lot of the competence, a lot of the policies are on the national level, but a lot of them, where you see added value, are put on the European level. And not only on issues of defense, that's first, that's obvious, not only on the issue of sharing and gathering of intelligence and information and investigation, but also economically. Take, for example, our single market. Everybody is talking about the European single market, but you know better than I do that this European single market is only partially a single market. It's only a single market for a number of goods and services representing roughly 35% of the total economic activity in the European Union. Digital, forget it, the single market. Telecom, forget the single market. Capital market, we don't have a unified capital market in Union. We don't have a mortgage market, unified mortgage market in the European Union. Energy, don't talk about energy. Energy is based on the treaty, is still a national competence. There is no common, we talk about the energy union, but it is still a competence on the national level. So I was asking always myself during the referendum, what these Brits are talking about, in fact, to go out of a union that in fact is no union for the moment. So the way forward, and that is what we need to do in parallel with the Brexit negotiations, is to get our act together, to put a union in place that is capable to develop the solutions for the challenges we are facing today. And that is on defense, on justice and home affairs, on the management of our outside common border. Otherwise you can forget Schengen. You cannot continue with Schengen if you're not having common border management. And the same is true for the governance of the Eurozone, for example. And the same is true also for the completion of the internal market. And there are two questions now. The first question is, if I present you that scheme for the future, first of all, is it possible? And secondly, do the people want that? Because that's always the argument that you hear. Maybe it's fantastic, maybe it's true, maybe it's necessary, but we live in a democracy and people don't want such a more enhanced, unified, integrated European Union. And the second question is it possible? Let me start maybe with the last question. Is it possible? Yeah, it is possible, because we did it already in the past. We got the same crisis in Europe at the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. At that moment, you remember it maybe, we got another name. It was not Euroscepticism, it was Eurosclerosis was the name at that moment. That was the period where we were in stagflation. And where you got very good growth figures in America and in Japan. Every week there was a book being published, The Japanese Miracle. You remember that period? Since the 90s, no book has ever been published with the Japanese miracle anymore, because they entered in their credit crunch, in their financial crisis. But we were in the same position at that moment. Eurosclerosis was the name. And at that moment, Jacques Delors was president of the Commission, and he came forward with an idea and saying, look, to come out of this crisis, we need to do something. Not to complain about it, but to reform it. And he launched what? The internal market. That was, you remember these billboards? 1992. In 1992, the world will change. Europe will be reformed. And he put it on the table, a full-fledged internal market, not only on this 35% of goods and services, on champagne, chocolates, and so on, but on all services, also on digital, also on telecom, also on capital, also in energy. And naturally, most of the member states said, okay, we're going to start with it, but not digital, not telecom, that's national interest. Not capital, that's too difficult. Not energy, also national interest. And then we are asking ourselves how it is possible, if we talk about digital, that Google, Amazon, Apple, Samsung, you name it, the 20 biggest internet companies worldwide are all American or Asian. Why? And because you don't have an internal market on that issue. If you are a small company and you want to launch a new application on internet, you need in Europe 28 authorizations. It's not like in the US where you have a federal communication agency who is dealing with that. No, you need 28 authorizations in Europe, plus an agreement with 130 mobile operators if it is a device that you want to launch on mobile. So that's the reality. So that's the reason, for example, that a company like Spotify, there are many people who think that Spotify is an American company, while it was in fact a Swedish company who went to America to roll out their system and then came back to Europe as company. Because here it was too difficult. You need authorization in every country. Well, there, with one authorization and 3 agreements with 3 mobile operators, you roll out your whole system. So that is what we need to do now. That is to remember that, in fact, we can come out from this crisis, as Delors did, by launching the internal market and a European strategy. And you remember that when he did it in 1900, by the end of the 80s, in the beginning of the 90s, we came out of this crisis, this eurosclerosis, with growth figures 2.5%, 3%, even more than 3% at that time, by launching a European project, by launching a European market. The same has to happen now. It is possible. Delors did it. It can happen again. And not only on the field of economics or trade, also on the field of defense, intelligence, justice and home affairs, and so on, and so on. That is the way forward. And not to complain about, people are against it. This is my last point. Are people against it? Not at all. What we see is that people are against the European Union as it works today. People are not against Europe. Every survey that we organize, also in Britain, are very clear about it. People are saying, in the fight against the terrorists, you need more European action. I have here the figures with me. I hope that I find them. I have them here. 82% of the Europeans are saying more European action in the fight against terrorism. 82%, quite an interesting majority, I should say. 77% is saying we need more European action in the fight against unemployment. 74% of the Europeans are saying we need more EU action in the problems of migration. 71% are saying that we need EU action on the protection of our external borders, so to do it together with an agency with a real European border and coast guard. So people are not against Europe, but people are against the European Union as it works today, with the lack of results, with the lack of capacities, with the Union always, as I said from the beginning on, acting too little and far too late. And you see it also on the figures concerning the exit. So after the Brexit, some people have said, now you're going to see in all the other countries, we will organize also referenda, and in all these referenda, people will say, we want to go out of the Union. Well, the opposite is happening, in fact. Since the Brexit, what we see is that the figures for support for the Nexit, for example, there's the Dutch going out, or the Austrians going out, or Oexit, I don't know how you have to name it, that these figures are dropping. What we see is, for example, in the Netherlands, before the Brexit, half of the population was in favor of an exit. Since the Brexit, it has fallen from 50 to 30%. And look to what will happen in the elections now. Everybody's predicting, it's going to be the Nexit party, the Wilders party, we're going to win the election. I'm not sure about that. Because people are not stupid. They know very well, they are very critical. I'm very critical, more critical than a Eurosceptic, about the functioning of the European Union of today. But to go out of the system, destroying it, that's absolutely one bridge too far. And that's the reason, for example, in Austria, I followed that. So there was a first election. The Green candidate won against the extreme right-wing candidate, and in the second round, not the second round, it was the second attempt to elect an Austrian president, he won with 300 300,000 votes more than in the first attempt. Why this 300,000 were switching? Because the extreme right-wing candidate, wasn't 100% clear about his position on Austria in or Austria out of the European Union and the common currency. People don't like uncertainty, instability, and so they want not to give up it, but they want to reform it. So what needs to be done in 2017, in parallel with the Brexit negotiations, which will be far difficult negotiations? I'm always saying it will be the divorce of all divorces, this negotiation, with thousands and thousands of different files, to start naturally with the financial burden, and it's already a difficult one. But people don't want to go in that direction. And so we need to use the Brexit to reform the European Union in parallel with the European government, not a commission like today. The commission of today, it's 28. We don't have even competence and portfolios for 28 commissioners of today. If tomorrow there is a new member state, Macedonia coming in or Serbia coming in, we don't know what to give him, to this new commissioner, a number of competences. So you need to make it smaller at the one hand, but at the other hand, with a number of European capacities, European capabilities, and capabilities on the European level to face the challenges that we see today. And that is my main message of today. What is needed in 2017 is courage of national political leaders to see that in the future, sovereignty, the best thing to do is to share it on the European level to deal with these problems. And it could be that 2017 is not only the year of the start of the Trump administration, that was on the 20th of January, it could be also a game changer on the issues of Europe. One example, if you see, for example, who can be elected in France? Emmanuel Macron is a possibility, a huge possibility as next president of France. Well, he is somebody who is saying, well, we need to share our sovereignty on the European level, not on the level of the French nation state. I have to tell you, for a French politician, it's more than a courageous point of view and opinion. It's the first time that I hear a candidate for the French presidency saying that sovereignty, you have to share it on the European level and not to exercise it on the national level. So I'm an optimist by nature. I am a follower of Sir Karl Raimund Popper, who have always said optimism is a moral duty. But in this case, I think that 2017 and these national elections in Germany, these national elections in the Netherlands, follow them, national elections also in France, could be the starting point of a new generation of politicians who are not nationalists, not populists. Everybody is talking about the thesis now. Nationalism, populism is growing in Europe. Well, the antithesis is already born, and the antithesis will be a generation of politicians who see the solution for Europe in a federation on the European level, not destroying national identities, but just strengthening, safeguarding, guaranteeing the diversity that exists on the European continent. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Move this out of the way. Okay, if you could stay up here. Fantastic. So we've got time, obviously, for questions. Quite a bit of time. So you have your apps, and on the apps there's a Q&A bit. You can press Q&A, and then you can suggest questions that will crop up on the screen. I'm going to start with one, though. Actually, can we bring up a voting question, please? Are you all set up for that? Yeah, great. Can you just bring up a yes-no voting question? So I'm going to ask the room this, because obviously there are many challenges to the European Union. You are a very good sample of professional investors across Europe on a high level, and across 13 countries in Europe, 14 countries in Europe. So here's a really simple one. I want you to all vote on this. Do you think in 10 years' time, so it's quite hard to guess this, in 10 years' time that the European Union will exist? Okay? Yes or no? Best bet. In other words, more than 50% chance. So say yes if you think actually, yeah, it's bound to. No if you think actually there's a more than 50% chance that it won't exist. Let's see what the room thinks on that. Might be obvious, but it might not. I'd be interested to see. Okay, tell me when we're ready. Great. Okay, and it's okay. 83% of you think absolutely it will. 17% actually think that on balance you think it won't. Now here's the second follow-up question. Can you put another yes-no question in, please? Who thinks it would be better if it existed? And who thinks it would not be better? So again, when it pops up, answer yes if you think that we will all profit if the European Union continues to exist, or and no if you actually think it would be better, we would all not profit. It would be better if it did not exist. So go one more time. Yes if you think that the European Union, as it stands or as it would develop, is better for us overall, and no if you think it is not. Okay. Very much, most of the room, but not all of you, has to be said, still a good 15% of you, are very much on the side of Guy here. I'm going to ask you one question, and then we'll get to the other question. So obviously, put your questions in now as well. You know, on the app, you can put questions in. What happens is they can put questions in, and they can vote on other people's questions which ones that they would like me to ask. So that's how it works. You'll see it on screen.
Quite complicated.
Yeah, exactly. It's a complicated voting system. Let's start with one thing, though, for you. My observation about actually both the Trump victory and also Brexit is that the people who voted for it weren't really voting. One of the reasons a big chunk of them voted for it wasn't really to do with the European Parliament or to do with, it wasn't such a big vision. It was because they felt disconnected from the people in power. So in the case of Trump, even though he's a billionaire, they said, he's our man. He speaks directly to me. I can trust him, whereas I don't know what these other people are. And certainly in Britain, it's a very well-established pattern where people felt disconnected from European Parliament. It's rarely on screen. Even when it is on screen, actually we're told that in any case it doesn't matter very much. Actually, the European Commission is where decisions are made, the European Council. So actually you're not seeing any direct link to what they think is important. And of course, there's a lot of people who are disenfranchised. They have no money, no jobs, and they're generationally no money, no jobs. So all they want is change. And so that's kind of one of the reasons they voted for that. So let's just look at the practicalities of trying to implement your federalized vision of Europe. There's still a large number of people who are disenfranchised and who feel disconnected from those levers of power and the people in power. So where's the solution there when it comes to re-engaging with those people?
Well, first of all, on Brexit, I think I'm a little bit of another opinion than you. I don't think that it was about European Parliament in the Brexit referendum. What happened was, first of all, the whole Brexit referendum started as an internal catfight in the Conservative Party. Now, there was no real need to have a referendum on Brexit. It was an attempt of David Cameron, he didn't succeed, that's clear, to reinstall unity in the Conservative Party about the issue of Europe. And he negotiated a deal. That deal was not a bad one, but nobody has spoken about that deal anymore after it was done, after we agreed on it. And the whole Brexit referendum was captured by the Leave camp as a discussion about migration, let's be honest. It was about migration. It was about this Polish, Romanian, Bulgarian plumbers, construction workers who are picking your jobs here in and outside London. That was the main thing about. And the Remain camp, in my opinion, made a huge mistake to do it far too rational. And they were all the time saying, oh, if we go out, it will be a catastrophe economically. And every day came out a new study, analysis, one even worse than the other. So I think always, if you do really every day smash new disasters and catastrophes, and you launch them in the public opinion, at the end they have no effect at all anymore, if you do it every day or every week like it happened. So it was, and so the Remain camp was not, absolutely not about emotion. It was purely about rational, and it didn't work. And the Leave camp got that migration, captured that migration issue. While I have to tell you, is it a problem migration in Europe? Internal migration. I'm not talking about refugees or migrants coming up from outside the European Union. I'm talking about labor mobility inside the European Union. Well, labor mobility inside the European Union is not too high, it's far too low. Labour mobility in the European Union is 1%. So there is a mobility of 1% of the working force in Europe. In the US, it's 10%. And that's the reason there's low labour mobility in Europe, that we have 2 million vacancies who are not fulfilled because of a lack of labour mobility. So all these arguments were not used in the whole campaign. And it became a fight on migration where citizens outside London, mainly in England, so not in Scotland, not in Northern Ireland, were anxious, fear, and said, oh, maybe we are better out. Maybe it should be already different now. I don't know if tomorrow there is a new referendum.
Changed a little. There's actually one other element as well, which is for the last 30 years or so, every time something positive happens out of, say, a European Union directive, the government claims ownership of it and said, we have passed this law because it's good for you, and they don't mention where it came from. When something negative happens, then they say, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. It was the European Union that made us do it. So there is a systematic bias for the public.
But that said, what I think is that we need changes also on the European level, certainly on regulation. I think that we have far too much regulation on our markets from the European side, and not always the right one. Look, for example, to the competition rules. Our competition rules are, in my opinion, not longer in accordance with the globalized world of today. We have still competition rules in which when there is a concentration that is too high on the Scandinavian market, the competition authorities are forbidding it. For example, an example I always give was the possible merger between Scania and Volvo. And the competition authority in the European Union forbid it. Because this company should have a quasi-monopoly in Finland and in Sweden. Sorry, we are talking about an internal market, creating European champions, and in the meanwhile we have rules where we say, if your company becomes too big in a local market here in Europe, then you cannot do it. That's stupid.
Yeah, because of course you should be able to buy a British car or a German car.
So we need less rules and we need more policies. That is, so we need a smaller commission, but a real government. We need maybe less intrusion in national budgets by the European Union, but you need a real economic governance, a minister of finance, a treasury behind the euro. I'm always saying maybe a state can exist without a currency, but a currency cannot exist without a state authority behind it. There are no proof of that it's possible to do so. So we need to fix that. So it means less maybe bureaucracy, intrusion, commissioners, regulation at the one hand, but more common policies where you have added value and that we desperately need. That is the shift to make. So it's not a question of, is it now less Europe or more Europe? No, it's another Europe. A Europe with normal institutions.
But do you think, because this is what Varoufakis said last year when he was speaking here, he said that he's pro-European despite what happened to him, but he said the basic problem is the Parliament, the Council and the Commission, especially the Council and the Commission, and of course the finance ministers' meetings, are so non-transparent and they're so hidden away that actually it's impossible even for national governments to really know what's going on. And I think that's one of the reasons why people aren't engaged. He's actually very pro-Europe and wants it to reform. But do you think that that structure that we currently have is fit for purpose, or do you think that needs to be changed radically?
No,
European president.
So on one thing I agree with him. That's on the need to reform these institutions. What you need is what you have in every normal, I should say, a state organization. You need a small government controlled by a European Parliament representing citizens and by what I call a Senate of States representing the member states, because in a federal system that is a reality.
With public debates rather than private ones.
And then you need to create a public European demos. That's also necessary. You cannot say, there is no, European democracy. It's not true. I'm elected in Belgium. My constituency was elected with 550,000 votes, so more than 500,000 votes. You cannot say, you have no legitimation or democratic legitimation. No, my democratic legitimation comes from the European elections that are organized. What I believe is that we need not only national list. I think we need also to create a European demos transnational list, so that people from the 28 or the 27 countries can vote for a number of candidates, and that there is a far more direct link between the citizens on the one hand and their representative on the European level.
Great, fantastic. We're going to go to some questions here. Anonymous says, hello Anonymous, says, what practical advice would you give those who voted to remain in the Brexit referendum in order to help prevent the UK actually leaving the European Union? Other than asking maybe Putin to get some hacking going and see if you can change things. So yeah, what practical advice to actually prevent the Brexit?
There will be, so I know that there are a number of scenarios saying, will it happen, will it not happen? It will happen. There is a majority in the House of Commons, there is a majority in the House of Lords under a number of conditions. There is a majority. So I think it's bad, it's a tragedy for Europe and for Britain that Britain is going out, but it will happen. And the negotiation will take place. And the negotiation will start normally the first days of June. So we are expecting the triggering by the end of March. We expect then a mandate to negotiate of the Council by the end of April and the start by the end of May, initially June of these negotiations. And then a 14-15-month negotiation on the withdrawal agreement, on a number of transition arrangements, and then the final procedure in the Parliament to approve, because European Parliament has to say yes or no against the outcome of these negotiations. Everything done before. Does it
Unlike the UK Parliament, of course, which they don't want to vote.
No, well, the UK Parliament is now claiming the same power for them as European Parliament has. So the European Parliament has become the benchmark for British democracy. That seems to me already an enormous step in the good direction, but that is what is happening for the moment. But that doesn't mean that a new relationship will already be in place at that moment. The new relationship will be, for example, I give only this as an example, could be a trade agreement, free trade agreement, plus a number of other cooperations in the field of, say, research, external security, and so on. That new relationship will not be done in 14, 15 months. It will be the whole transition period, who can take 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, who will be used to discuss, to debate, and to negotiate that future relationship. We will only have a general view. The details of it will take, again, 2, 3, 4 years.
Do you think, for the health of the European Union as a whole, it is important that the British Parliament, the British government, is actually, if you like, overall disadvantaged relative to member states? Like, you must, in a sense, punish them because they are not part of the club.
Well, that's not a question of punishment. I think it's the wrong wording. Not even revenge, punishment, whatever. No, but you cannot accept, and that is a basic principle, that you can have outside the Union a better status than as member of the Union. So if Britain goes out and it wants a trade agreement with us, it becomes a third country. And a third country means that you can have a partnership with it. There is no problem. Yeah. We have partnerships with Norway, with Switzerland, associations with other countries on research, for example, Horizon 2020 and so on. We have with Israel is a country with which we work. That will be the template. They will be a third country with rights and obligations. And the template for it, we have it in place with a number of other countries. Nevertheless, again, it will be a huge thing, because 40 years of marriage, so maybe there are some people with experience here, know what it creates of relations, bonds, and you have to unravel that all. Based on the idea also that Mrs. May and the UK authorities are saying we don't accept anymore in the final partnership, not in the negotiation period, the the judicial oversight of the European Court of Justice. So they want to disconnect themselves also from that.
Let's look at a few more questions here. Yes, it's one that's got lots of votes here. Why has the EU been waiting for the Brexit vote to start about reforming the Union, and why will now be different? Actually, do you think that maybe the Brexit vote might be the spur to actually make reforms that end up, promoting the long life of it?
Maybe a little bit to contradict that. It's not so that we started only to think about the reforming of the Union now. The whole convention that was organized plus the European Constitution was an exercise in 2003, 2004, 2005 to reform the Union, and was voted down, as we know, in two referenda in France and in the Netherlands. Not for reasons of European issues, but referenda who voted that down for internal reasons. Even the Socialist Party in France, who is normally a pro-European party, was split between those who voted in favor and those who voted against the reform of the European Union, because they were against Chirac at that time, who was president of the Republic. So what I'm proposing here in my intervention is to go back to the initial idea of the founding fathers. Because what I'm explaining to you, European defense, a European government, a federal system, is not new. It was the initial idea of the founding fathers of the European Union from day one. In a few days, we are going to Rome again, here, a little bit further, for the festivities of the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome. And we're going to make a huge, a number of huge interventions to say all the positive we think about the Treaty of Rome. The reality is it is a falsification of history. In fact, the Treaty of Rome was not a big victory. It was the fallback position because we could not agree after the no vote in the French National Assembly on a real political union, economic union, defense union. That had happened. The fact is that the 6 initial founding fathers of the Union, so the 6 member states, were ready to launch that project in 52, 53, 54. I've written a book about it. So we're going to make a little bit of publicity for it. And it calls, in English, Europe's Last Chance. It's an American editor. So that's the reason that it is a different title, naturally, than the French version. Le Mal Européen is there, the title. And what I do in that book is to explain that we have, in fact, a falsification of history. When we go to the university and in our schools, we are saying, oh, after the Second World War, a number of our founding fathers came together, Monet and Schuman and Spaak and even Winston Churchill. We have to come back to Winston Churchill a moment. And they got a big idea. We're going to work together. And then we went to Rome, we made the Treaty of Rome, and then progressively we created the European Union. That's a falsification of history. The reality is completely different. After the Second World War, they came together, they had a clear idea of a federal union, and it fell down because of one vote in the French National Assembly in 1954. Because the new French Prime Minister, Pierre Mendès France, didn't want to defend and to launch a confidence vote on that project of a European Union, defense union and political union. Because it was a project of his predecessor. So he was not interested in it. That is what it happened. Like there is, for example, a falsification of history on the role of Churchill. Everybody says Churchill was for the United States of Europe, but not with Britain inside. That is what is officially what they are saying in London, and based on the biography written by a Eurosceptic, Mr. Boris Johnson, who is a famous author of biographies, also on Winston Churchill. Well, the reality is completely different. Between 1946 and 1951, Winston Churchill was the politician. He was leader of his Majesty's opposition at that moment, because it was Attlee who was Prime Minister, Labour Prime Minister of Britain, and he was in favor of the entrance of Britain in the steel and coal community. He lost a vote against Attlee with 309 against 296. So 7 stupids, excuse me, decided on that issue in Westminster. At that time, in the beginning of the 50s. So their idea was very clear. If we got in place today what they had in mind in the 50s, there was no, we got a European Border and Coast Guard, but not one of 250 million. We got a defense community and we were not scared because Trump is saying you have to pay more now as member of NATO. No, we should have got our own European defense community, because it's completely ridiculous to think that all member states are capable even to make further deficits to give money to their armies.
Let's just quickly, got a few minutes left, let's just quickly go into, there's a couple of questions here. One of them is, what do you think the percentage of GDP should be that should be paid towards the European Union in order to be able to do these things? Do you have an estimation?
No, absolutely. I have no estimation at all, because that is completely depending on what you put on this level.
But for you're quite clear on what you think should go on that level. So.
I have given you one example. That of border management, where the European border management today, so the enhanced Frontex, as we call it, has 250 million, 254 million is the budget. And Homeland Security in America have more than 60 billion.
So all you say is probably substantially more, but you don't know until you decide which one.
But it doesn't make any difference for citizens. Citizens will pay directly to the Union what they pay now to the member state. And I think with the assurance that we're going to have better results because we do it together, better results for less money. That is a reality. Everybody knows that in the private sector, that you have to combine and cooperate to lower the costs, no? That's what you're doing. Only on the politician side, it's difficult to explain that. If you do it together and you do it in an efficient way, that it costs less.
Let's talk about talking about efficiency. Are there too many members of the European Union? Because it is so hard to get decisions made. Given that there isn't a president and there requires unanimity, was there a mistake made in having 27, 28 members? And it would be better to go back to a kind of core that actually do agree on the project.
That is, in fact, a very non-productive discussion, because you have it in reality. You have your Eurozone. That's our 19. That is the core, automatically. And I want to limit it to that. And to say, OK, you can have this currency or not this currency, and that's over then. But what we cannot continue to do is this eternal inflation of opt-ins and opt-outs. Exceptions, earmarks, rebates. You have to look once into the European budget to understand how complex it is. The budget is not the budget. The budget is a number of rules on the European level, and then there are more than 50 exceptions. Rebates. Start with the British. Then the rebates on the rebates. Because there are a number of countries who are saying, if the British have rebate, we, net contributor to the European Union, want also a rebate on the rebate of the British. So the Swedish, the Danish, the Dutch, the Germans have all a rebate on the rebate. So in that sense, Brexit is an opportunity, because if the rebate disappears,
no one else has a reason.
The rebates on the rebates.
No one else should have it. One more quick one, which is a kind of political question. The interference of the Russian government in the US elections, of course, has made people very scared to some extent. And also, as you said, there has been apparently interference by Putin on European elections as well. How important do you think this is? And in fact, generally, the future of using sort of cybercrime, if you like, or cyber interference as a political tool and a diplomatic tool, how important do you think that is? Do you think it's a threat? Should we do something about it?
The European Union is doing something about it, very limited. In the External Action Service have been created Unity now, a few years ago. I don't know if there are 8 people working in it or 10 people working in it, but okay, it exists. Who is trying to deal with this? So flagging what they think that are, also in cooperation with national authorities, what they think that are interference in the information sharing on internet.
But are you worried? Because obviously Marine Le Pen is like, could be supported.
Let's be very clear. It didn't start with Trump. It started in Europe. We all know that a party like the Le Pen party, the Front National, has links, financial links with the Russians. And so that's not new. I think even if I go a little bit further, nationalism and populism didn't start with Trump. It started in Europe. It are people like Farage and a number of people in the Conservative Party who went to the Republican Party and started cooperation with the Republican Party. So in a certain way, Trump a product from European nationalism and populism, and not the opposite.
Do you think Trump is an enemy of the European Union?
I don't know. The only thing what I know is what he said about the Union, and that was not very positive, and certainly not two of his inner circle. Steve Bannon on the one hand, and you follow a little bit what he is thinking and saying, and he thinks really that we need to destroy the Union. And then Malloch, the candidate apparently, but we don't know yet, of the American administration to be ambassador in the European Union, who is openly predicting the end of the euro and saying that it will be a good thing so it's clear that maybe not the American administration, but the White House sees Europe not as a union and don't want to have really close relations with the union. They want more close relations with every country individually. And that's an old system, divide et impera.
Last question.
And in Rome you can say that.
Very last question, which is a couple of the ones here. When it comes to, it's just about this, protecting the rights of European citizens, whether they are for or against this, because obviously there's a lot of people who are anti-Europe and want to get out. And this is going to potentially create different tiers, whether they're countries who want to be in the European Union or in the euro or out of the euro and so on. It's going to be quite hard to do that. Do you think it's important to try to have a kind of high level in terms of safeguarding, expenditure, welfare and lobbying for all of those people? Or do you think it's important for the safety of the European Union that you differentiate good and bad members?
Now, you're a member, and then you have and the rights and the obligations of a member state, or you're a third country. It's one or the other. So that is my opinion. And if you're a third country, then you can still have a close partnership. And in this close partnership, we will define the rights from all people living there and from the people, UK citizens living in Europe. And the basic principles will be reciprocity, symmetry, equity. That will be the basic principles. It will be a balanced system. That said, what we are also looking on is, in fact, a number of British people, no, a lot of them, will lose their EU citizenship without their will. They have EU citizenship, and because of the decision of Brexit, they lose it, not because they want to lose it, because it's the consequence of it. So we are looking to this, what link we could offer in a generous way to these individual UK citizens.
So are you for that, the idea of actually offering EU citizenship people could voluntarily apply for?
Yeah, I'm in favor of that. Another point is to see if I can have a majority on that in the European Parliament, because the normal thinking is that such a citizenship is linked to a national identity, to nationality. And if that nationality goes out, then automatically falls your citizenship. I'm a little bit more, I don't believe, I come from Belgium in nationalism. I don't believe a lot in national identity either. I think it's a way of categorizing people, typically for politicians. And I think that every individual is unique, has his own identity. And that this own identity is far more complex, and let not take away your identity by politicians or abuse politicians about your identity. You decide on your identity. And it is not, it's better to take it out of the hands of politicians, right, as we know in the 20th century, when they abused identity for other reasons.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guy Verhofstadt.